Welcome to the Bo Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. We certainly need all three. For those HGTV lovers out there, you are familiar with the show Flip or Flop, which is a house flipping show. I make that allusion today to talk about the midterm elections coming up in November and whether Republicans will flip the House and Senate to a majority or whether it will be a flop. We are just under 5 weeks away from Election Day on November 8th. So I think it's a good time to look at the landscape, do some analysis, and make some predictions. After all, a lot hinges upon this as the nation continues to experience major inflation due to bloated spending, an energy crisis in which OPEC is reducing oil production, forcing the U.S. to turn to other sources when we could be, and have been, energy independent just a few years ago. Also, in places like New York City, rent prices have outpaced wage growth. So it's becoming unaffordable to live in many cities across this country. Then, of course, there's the border crisis, with 2 million apprehensions this year, the most ever recorded. We've seen Joe Biden and the Dems panic a bit and roll out things like student loan forgiveness and marijuana decriminalization to try to woo people to their side. But it looks precarious for them. They are sensing trouble, which is why we see these haphazard agendas being rolled out. And with the Supreme Court kicking Roe v. Wade down to the states, Democrats will make that their number one issue and will posit that the conservative majority court has taken women's rights away, which is of course untrue. But when the economy is as bad as it is, Democrats can't run on that. So they will pick this wedge social issue. Another thing that I will talk about today is the Hispanic vote, because they represent the second largest voting bloc and tend to vote in similar patterns as independents, who have a very unfavorable job approval rating of Joe Biden. Furthermore, Hispanic families statistically have one more person in their household than Caucasian families, which means one more mouth to feed, when your dollar is getting you less and less. And this has an enormous impact on Hispanic families. And I say families because they are tight-knit families that they still consider to be community building blocks. So now let's look at the data. Nate Silver's 538 is a go-to place for many networks to predict elections, especially more left-wing media. They predict Republicans having about a 70% chance to flip the House, but only about a 33% chance of flipping the Senate. As I read an insightful article from Jeffrey Anderson of American Greatness, he analyzes several polls and notes that 538 does not take into account how much they have oversampled Democrats in years past, and also how late voters are more likely to vote against the party of an unfavorable president. And we know that Joe Biden is very much underwater in those polls, as much as they try to hide those numbers. However, if you look at Real Clear Politics, and that's a site that I visit frequently, they take an average of a number of polls, in case one poll has a small sample size or oversamples Democrats. So you get a better picture. RCP holds the current Senate battle at 47 solid Republican seats and 46 solid Democrat seats and 7 toss-ups, which we will get into. Those will make or break how the Senate flops. RCP's prediction right now is that the GOP wins 5 of those 7 toss-ups, giving them a 52-seat majority of the chamber. That is important in the case that Mitt Romney decides to side with the Dems on any legislation. The GOP would still have a 1-seat buffer. In the House, RCP predicts about 34 toss-ups, with Republicans picking up anywhere between 6 and 40 seats, making it highly likely that the GOP takes the House, which is a far cry above Nate Silver's 70% chance. The Cook Political Report also documents trends and predictions and gives the GOP a slight edge in the Senate with 4 toss-up races. For the Senate races that they consider Republican-leaning, Ohio, Florida, and North Carolina, Cook has an undefeated prediction when they have been called that way. So those states appear solid. The 4 toss-ups include Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Republicans would only need 3 out of those 4 to take a 51-seat majority. So it really boils down to about 10 races. So let's take a closer look. In Florida, Marco Rubio seems to be getting a more comfortable lead over Val Demings with about a +4 margin. I do find it strange that even here in my state of Florida, aka DeSantis land, that Rubio's margin would seem that thin. DeSantis came into his governorship with a +200,000 Democrat voter registration and has flipped that to a +300,000 Republican voter registration. Even though Florida is kind of a mini United States since it has a little bit of everyone here, the GOP has been on a tear in this state. But I see that race as firmly Rubio's. In North Carolina, Ted Budd holds a slim margin of about 1.5 over Democrat Sherry Beasley. So I see that holding. In Nevada, Republican Adam Laxalt holds a similar slim margin over Catherine Cortez Masto. This would be a big pickup for the GOP. Every single poll has Laxalt ahead. So something is afoot in Nevada. They're willing to oust an incumbent. However, incumbent Republican Ron Johnson seems to still be cruising a few points ahead in every single poll over Democrat Mandela Barnes. New Hampshire seems to be tilting more in favor of Democrat incumbent Maggie Hassan over challenger Don Baldock. That's about +6, so let's keep that one in the Dem column for the time being. Georgia is definitely a critical race because you have Democrat Raphael Warnock, who won in a special election in 2020 and is one of 2 Democrat senators in that state. But his challenger is a Republican and former football great Herschel Walker. This pits black man against black man in a state where the black vote has mattered and where Stacey Abrams re-engineered things to game the system to allow Warnock and John Ossoff to win their respective elections and turn Georgia for Joe Biden. However, the Georgia legislature shored up its election integrity, making it much, much harder to cheat and outlawing ballot harvesting. So the chance to cheat is much harder now. You may remember that in Dinesh D'Souza's documentary, 2,000 Mules, Atlanta was one of his cities of focus, where he has video evidence of hundreds of mules dropping multiple ballots off at drop boxes in the middle of the night. Stacey Abrams also lost a recent federal lawsuit claiming that Georgia's new voter laws were racist. We will count that as a big L for Stacey. But that's why in a tight race like this, where Warnock only holds an average of about +3, anything can happen, but cheating will be much harder. This race honestly could go either way. It will be a close one. In Arizona, another state that beefed up its election integrity laws, Republican Blake Masters is nipping at the heels of incumbent Mark Kelly. That race is down to about a +4 margin in favor of Kelly. So like Herschel Walker's race, it's super tight, but we know that it will be harder for Democrats to cheat in those races. Republican Kari Lake may win the governorship in Arizona and is ahead, which could spell good things for Blake Masters. Kelly has outspent Masters $52 million to $5 million, but yet he's only ahead by a small margin. That's remarkable. Pennsylvania is also quite peculiar. You may remember that the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania changed election laws at the last minute in 2020, and many believe that that was unconstitutional because it did not have legislative approval. That was a state that Trump won in 2016, but flipped to Biden in 2020. Just like Georgia, doctor turned TV personality Dr. Mehmet Oz trails John Fetterman by about an average of 4 points. That's awfully close, so we can't really know how this one will play out. Washington State Senate race is also worth mentioning because history would seem to predict that Democrat Patty Murray has it in the bag. But a new Trafalgar Group poll puts her only 2 points ahead of Tiffany Smiley, which is a poll drastically different from the others. This one is one to watch, and let's see what the final results are. Usually you don't see a differential in polls that stark. So I see this as coming down to about 7 close races, where the other seemingly safe 3 could swing in these last 5 weeks. Those can be the dark horse victories for Republicans. So let's take these 7 races and see what might logically happen. Wisconsin, I say Ron Johnson keeps his lead and wins. So we put that in the GOP column. North Carolina goes to Republican Ted Budd because that's a conservative state that, although became more purple in recent years, is wising up. In Nevada, same thing. Nevadans, once the home of former Democrat Majority Leader Harry Reid, must be feeling the pains of inflation and shifting. I say Nevada goes to Republican Adam Laxalt. New Hampshire has leaned GOP in years past. Biden won by 7, though, and this northeastern state sometimes has trouble making its mind up. Republican Governor Chris Sununu holds a 15-point lead over his challenger. See how weird New Hampshire is? They are fine with a Republican governor, but they want a Democrat senator. But for the sake of being polemic and because New Hampshire is a bit odd, I'll give this race to Maggie Hassan. Pennsylvania is another odd one. This Senate seat was previously held by a Republican, Pat Toomey. Some Pennsylvanians don't like that Dr. Oz claims Pennsylvania is home, even though his home is really in New Jersey. But Dr. Oz made a career out of challenging unhealthy habits and took a shot at his opponent, John Fetterman's health, as he had had a stroke. Dr. Oz has also been attacking Fetterman's soft record on crime. And everyone knows how bad Philadelphia has gotten. So the issue of crime may be a deciding factor. The two have agreed to a debate on October 25th after Fetterman had stalled. So provided that Oz can debate well, I think he can swing this race with this one debate in a late contest. So I will call the Keystone State for Dr. Oz. Georgia is also a tough one to call because this should be a GOP layup. But the combination of massive spending by Dems in this state, coupled with Hollywood's investment in Georgia as a low-tax production state, has changed the demographics. Stacey Abrams, who wanted to be governor of the state and now wants to be president, has used Georgia as her stepping stone. She galvanized the black vote and the white liberal vote, especially women. It didn't help that some Trump acolytes told Georgia voters to stay home in 2020 because they said it was rigged. So Dems took the 1, 2, 3 trifecta of president and 2 Senate races in 2020. But now that cheating has been reduced, I like Herschel Walker's chances. I think he's the right guy to challenge Warnock, who hasn't made any splashes in the short time that he's been in the Senate. And now voters don't have the option of voting only across racial lines this time around. And I see a low turnout, but Republicans will have to step up. So I actually like a Herschel Walker win here in Georgia. I would say that either Arizona or Georgia become a GOP pickup, perhaps both, but I'll just say one to be safe. And if my predictions are right, that means the GOP wins with a 52-seat majority. In the House, I think Republicans take a comfortable 20-seat lead, as these races seem to be a bit more predictable. So for the House and the Senate, this is a big shift, but a predictable one with an unpopular president and 3 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Now let's take a look at the governor's races, because the governor's races are also a temperature test of the public. It looks to me like the GOP makes gains here in Nevada and Wisconsin, 2 of those purple states that can go either way. But once again, in a bad economy, voters, especially independents, vote with their wallets. What's more, Democrats are going to lack turnout because they have absolutely nothing or no one to be excited about. There are no historic races here to circle the wagons over. A vote for a Democrat would be a silent condoning of Joe Biden's leadership and the direction of the country. I really like Kari Lake's chances in Arizona, and that would be a GOP hold. But Kari is proving to be a new rock star in the Republican Party. This would mean that there would be about 30 Republican governors and 20 Democrat governors. And mark my words, that California Governor Gavin Newsom will be attempting to make the leap from governor of one of the 2 most liberal states in this country to run for president in 2024. A new Trafalgar poll has New York gubernatorial Republican challenger Lee Zeldin just 2 points behind Kathy Hochul. Just like Washington State, Trafalgar is producing results wildly different from comparative polls. I don't know why that is, but I wonder if it's closer to reality than the other polls. It's hard to imagine New Yorkers being smart or bold enough to elect a Republican governor. The last Republican governor was George Pataki, and that was in 2006. Most smart Republicans got fed up and left the state. From 1895 to 1910, New York had consecutive Republican governors, including Teddy Roosevelt. But by 1928, it was under the control of the other Roosevelt, FDR. So who knows? Conventional wisdom tells us that New Yorkers will once again vote for the same policies that have run that state into the ground. But let's turn our eyes once again to Georgia and Nevada. Georgia has a Republican governor, Brian Kemp, who is a shoo-in for re-election. But Stacey Abrams' involvement has been able to nab some of those down-ballot races. Nevada is peculiar in that it's not a stronghold for either party. It's a pretty religionless state with the concentration on Sin City. But these are working-class people, especially those in casinos and hospitality. There's no cultural, media, or academic elite to tell them what to do. It has no state income tax, a very conservative tenet. This favors Senate candidate Adam Laxalt and gubernatorial candidate Joe Lombardo. Democrats have struggled in recent years to gain the working class vote. And now, perhaps more than ever, when working class folks are feeling the pain at the pump and in the food aisle, they will look to the economy as their deciding factor. And again, I come back to Latinos. When you look at Myra Flores' recent win in a big blue district in South Texas, you know that something is happening. I just attended a Hispanic leadership conference in Miami for conservatives, and you can tell that they are chomping at the bit. And one issue that is big for them is the border. Those are legal Latino citizens who are upset at illegal border crossings. The Biden policy has backfired. The pandering has not worked. So when you hear the term red wave, it may not necessarily mean midterm election shellacking, although that could happen. But what I see is a shifting dynamic where Democrats thought that allowing in illegals could create a voting bloc that would keep them in power forever. But in the process, they discounted Cubans, Colombians, Venezuelans, and others who came from socialist and communist countries who see the Biden strategy as similar to what they escaped. Biden has been banking on Mexicans and Central Americans to register them as soon as they come across the border. But he has infuriated the legal immigrants. Fentanyl is killing young adults as it gets smuggled across the southern border. Cartels now make billions off of human trafficking. It is an industry. Biden doesn't think that illegal aliens, criminals, and drugs are the enemy. He stated that it was Trump's MAGA people. These issues are why Republicans are going to make big gains in the midterms. It's a repudiation of Biden's policies. So there may be some indeterminate races in the Senate, but in reality, these toss-ups should be slam dunks for the GOP. Turnout will, of course, be a factor. But what do Democrats have to run on? What have they done to improve their constituents' lives? Crime is rising. Prices are rising. Mortgage and interest rates are rising. It seems America's in decline. And they don't take the threat of the CCP seriously. They keep on the whole Russia-Ukraine war when that vital money should be kept right here at home. The NIH even gave a new grant to EcoHealth, the very company that worked with China to do dangerous gain-of-function research at the lab where coronavirus first broke out. How is this possible? So what do these midterms mean? Well, they may mean a step out of the quicksand we're in. They may entail fiscal responsibility and a path to a better future. And it may be the awakening of the middle class and Latinos. I'm Bo, and that's the show.